"The hold stays," the airline manager said. "The soldier's remains can travel without you." Marcus Reed didn't raise his voice. He simply closed his hand around a scratched brass coin as the terminal went silent. Then the operations screen flashed. Multiple military aircraft were being redirected. Marcus glanced toward the runway. The manager had missed something, and his time to understand it was running out. 74 minutes. That was how much time Colonel Marcus Reed had left before Flight 237 closed its doors. Under ordinary circumstances, 74 minutes was plenty. Marcus had spent 29 years in the Army learning what could happen inside a single minute. He had made decisions under pressure, stood in rooms where one wrong sentence carried consequences, and learned long ago that panic rarely made a difficult situation better. But this morning was different. Because Marcus Reed was not traveling alone. Beyond the broad terminal windows of Columbus Metropolitan Airport, beneath a gray Georgia sky, a flag-draped transfer case rested under military supervision near the tarmac. Inside were the remains of Staff Sergeant Daniel Brooks, 28 years old, a soldier coming home for the last time. Marcus stood at the airline counter in full dress uniform, his shoulders straight beneath the weight of his jacket. Rows of ribbons crossed his chest. Polished insignia caught the cold fluorescent light. His black shoes reflected faintly against the tile floor. None of that seemed to matter to the man standing across from him. Eric Palmer looked at Marcus's documents, then at Marcus, and pushed the papers back across the counter. "I'm sorry, sir. You can't board Flight 237. For a moment, Marcus thought he had misunderstood. Behind him came the ordinary sounds of an American airport beginning another busy morning. Suitcase wheels rattling over tile, coffee lids snapping into place, boarding announcements echoing overhead, adults arguing quietly with phones pressed to their ears. Marcus placed one hand on the counter. "I'm sorry?" Eric Palmer was 44, neatly dressed in a dark airline suit with a silver station manager badge pinned near his lapel. His tie was perfectly centered. His expression carried the practiced patience of a man accustomed to telling travelers things they did not want to hear. "There's an issue with your travel authorization." Marcus looked down. His military orders lay beside his government identification. Next to those were his casualty escort authorization and the printed confirmation for Flight 237. Everything was there. Everything had already been coordinated. "What issue?" Palmer glanced toward Melissa Grant, the customer service agent at the computer beside him. Melissa was 34. She had been polite when Marcus first approached. She had scanned his identification, typed his confirmation number, and even started printing something before Palmer came over. Now she wouldn't look at him. Palmer tapped the papers with one finger. "Security protocol." Marcus waited. Palmer offered nothing else. "What security protocol?" "There's a verification concern. Concerning which document?" Palmer's jaw shifted. "Sir, I'm explaining that there's a security protocol, and I'm asking which part of my documentation failed it." A few feet away, a rolling suitcase stopped. Marcus heard it before he noticed the silence beginning behind him. He kept his eyes on Palmer. He had no desire to create a scene. He had no interest in winning an argument at an airline counter. He had come here for one reason, and that reason was waiting beyond the glass. Daniel. Marcus glanced toward the tarmac. From this angle, he could see only part of the secured area, but it was enough. Red, white, blue. He looked back at Palmer. "My orders identify me as the escort officer for Staff Sergeant Daniel Brooks. My reservation is confirmed. Your airline received the transfer information in advance. If something has changed, tell me what changed." Palmer folded his arms. "We have discretion in these situations." "These situations?" The words came out quieter than Marcus intended. Palmer hesitated. Only for a second. But Marcus saw it. He had spent too many years reading faces not to. Palmer straightened. "Situations requiring additional verification." Marcus studied him. "Then verify it." Melissa's fingers hovered above her keyboard. Palmer looked toward her. She lowered her hands. That small movement bothered Marcus more than Palmer's words. He checked the departure board. "Flight 237, on time." Marcus had 74 minutes. He reached into the inside pocket of his uniform jacket for another copy of the escort authorization. As he pulled it free, something slipped out with it. A scratched brass challenge coin struck the counter with a soft, metallic click. Marcus froze. For the first time that morning, something passed through his face that had nothing to do with Palmer. He picked up the coin carefully. Its edges were worn smooth from years of being carried. Scratches crossed the brass surface. It looked insignificant beside the polished metals on his uniform. But Marcus held it as though it were the most valuable thing he owned. Palmer glanced at it. "What's that?" Marcus closed his fingers around the coin. "Personal." Palmer gave a faint shrug. Marcus placed it beside his papers while he reorganized the documents. For half a second, the scratched brass caught the terminal light. Then Marcus covered it with his hand. "Mr. Palmer, I need you to look at these again. I've looked at them. Then tell me what's invalid." "I didn't say they were invalid." Marcus paused. That answer changed something. "You said there's a verification concern." "Correct. But you can't identify it. I don't have to discuss internal security procedures with a passenger." Marcus's eyes hardened slightly. "I'm not asking you to compromise security. I'm asking why you're stopping the assigned escort from accompanying a fallen soldier." More people heard that. The silence behind him widened. Marcus could feel a tension gathering against his back. Nobody said anything. He didn't turn around. Palmer leaned slightly closer. "Colonel, I'd appreciate it if you lowered your voice." Marcus stared at him. His voice had never risen. "I'm speaking at the same volume I was when I walked up here." Melissa looked at Palmer. Palmer ignored her. "We're trying to resolve this professionally. So am I." "Then you'll need to step aside while we review the matter." "How long?" "I can't give you a time frame." Marcus looked at the departure board again. A minute had passed. 73. He thought about the transfer case outside. He thought about the flag stretched across it, and somewhere beneath everything else, he felt the edge of an older emotion beginning to rise. Not anger, something heavier. The feeling of being examined before being heard, judged before being known. Marcus knew that feeling. He also knew what could happen when a black man allowed frustration to become visible in a place where someone had already decided he was the problem. So he breathed once, slowly. He straightened the papers into a perfect stack. "My documentation was coordinated before I arrived." Palmer said nothing. "My identity matches the orders." Nothing. "My reservation is confirmed." Still nothing. Marcus rested both hands on the counter where everyone could see them. "What exactly are you verifying?" Palmer's expression tightened. "I've already answered you." "No." "You've repeated a phrase." The terminal seemed suddenly too bright. Marcus could hear the hum of the ventilation system overhead. Somewhere behind him, a paper coffee cup touched a table. Nobody in the growing line spoke. Palmer looked past Marcus at the waiting passengers, then back at him. There was a subtle change in the manager's posture now. Marcus recognized it immediately. Palmer was no longer trying to solve a problem. He was trying to establish control. "Colonel Reed, I'm going to ask you one more time to step away from the counter." Marcus didn't move. Outside, Daniel Brooks waited beneath the American flag. Marcus's eyes flicked toward the scratched brass coin. For one brief instant, the airport disappeared. He remembered another voice, another place, a promise he had no intention of breaking. Then the departure board refreshed. Flight 237 remained on time. 72 minutes. Marcus lifted his eyes to Eric Palmer. Every document on the counter was valid. The reservation was real. The military orders were clear. And yet the man across from him had already decided Marcus was not getting on that aircraft. Marcus felt the first cold edge of alarm settle beneath his ribs. Because if there was nothing wrong with the paperwork, then whatever Eric Palmer believed was wrong had to be something else. 3 hours earlier, Marcus Reed had been wearing an apron. Not ribbons, not polished insignia, not the dark blue uniform that made strangers straighten when they noticed the silver eagle on his shoulders. Just a faded brown apron with a flower mark near the pocket. At 5:46 that morning, Morning Star Community Kitchen glowed like a small lantern against the darkness of Victory Drive. The neighborhood around it was only beginning to wake. A city bus sighed at the corner before pulling away. Delivery trucks rumbled somewhere beyond the old brick storefronts. Rain from the night before still shone in shallow cracks along the sidewalk, reflecting the yellow light above Morning Star's entrance. Inside, coffee steamed from dented metal urns. Plates clinked. Someone had left an old radio playing softly near the pantry. Marcus stood behind the serving counter, spooning scrambled eggs onto ceramic plates that didn't match. "Colonel, you're giving Walter too much bacon again." Marcus looked toward Denise Walker. At 59, Denise had coordinated Morningstar's volunteers long enough to know everyone's habits, excuses, and weaknesses. She stood beside a stack of bread trays with her reading glasses low on her nose. Marcus looked down at the plate. "Evidence? 4 pieces. Could be an accounting error." Denise laughed. "You command soldiers with that face? Used to work better on them." A gravelly voice came from the nearest table. "Don't listen to her, Colonel. Your accounting is excellent." Walter Price, 71, sat beside the window with a cane leaning against his chair and a worn veteran's cap resting on the table. He had spent years working maintenance jobs after leaving military service, and age had stiffened his hands without weakening his humor. Marcus carried the plate over. Walter looked at the bacon. "Now that's respect for veterans. Eat before Denise audits us." Marcus turned away. "Hold on." Walter's walker had shifted crookedly beside the chair. One front wheel leaned outward. Marcus crouched. "This happen again? Been fighting me since yesterday. You should have told somebody." "I just did." Marcus smiled faintly and tested the wheel. The retaining nut had loosened. Denise watched him disappear into the supply room and return with a small toolbox. Marcus knelt on the worn tile in his plain clothes, tightened the fitting, adjusted the wheel, then pushed the walker several feet across the floor. "Straight. Try it." Walter rose carefully and tested it. "Better than new." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded $20 bill. Marcus immediately shook his head. "No." "For your trouble." "No trouble. Take it." "Walter. I'm serious." "So am I." Marcus folded Walter's fingers back around the money. "Buy yourself lunch somewhere Denise can't count your bacon." "I heard that," Denise called. Walter chuckled. Marcus had almost reached the serving counter again when the front door opened and Helen Carter stepped inside. Helen was 68 and bundled in a worn burgundy coat. She carried 2 grocery bags, one in each hand, and tried to nudge the door shut with her shoulder. Marcus crossed the room before she made it 3 steps. "Give me those, I've got them." "I know, Then why are you taking them?" "Because I have arms." Helen surrendered the bags. "You always this stubborn before sunrise?" "Gets worse after coffee." He carried the groceries into the pantry. No one there knew much about the citations represented by the ribbons hanging in Marcus's closet. Most didn't know about the briefings he had attended, or the officers who returned his calls. At Morningstar, he was simply Marcus, the man who arrived before dawn, the man who lifted boxes without being asked, the man who knew Walter liked too much bacon, and Helen pretended her grocery bags weren't heavy. That was how Marcus preferred it. Denise was refilling coffee when she noticed the clock. "Marcus." He looked up. 6:20. His expression changed. Not dramatically, just enough for Denise to notice. He removed the apron. "I need to go. Airport?" Marcus nodded. Denise had known there was an escort assignment. She had not asked for details. Morningstar had taught her that sometimes kindness meant leaving a door open, without demanding that someone walk through it. Marcus folded the apron and placed it beneath the counter. As he reached for his coat, something slipped from his pocket. A brass coin struck the countertop. Click. Denise looked down. Marcus's hand closed over it almost immediately. She had seen military challenge coins before, but this one looked different. It wasn't displayed in a case or polished for presentation. Its surface was scratched. The edges had been worn smooth from years against fabric and keys. Marcus rubbed his thumb across one side. For a moment, he seemed very far from Morningstar. "Someone special give you that?" He looked at the coin. "Yes." Denise waited. Marcus didn't elaborate. Instead, he slipped it carefully into the inside pocket of his coat. "I'm bringing someone home today." Something in his voice stopped Denise from asking anything else. She simply touched his arm. "Then bring him home." Marcus nodded once. That sentence stayed with him all the way to the airport. Now, beneath the sterile white lights of Columbus Metropolitan, The warmth of Morning Star felt a world away. 71 minutes remained. Eric Palmer was still behind the counter. Melissa Grant was still staring at her computer. And Marcus's scratched brass coin rested beside paperwork Palmer could not identify a single legitimate problem with. Marcus looked down at it. His metals shone. The coin didn't. It was scarred, dull, almost ordinary, just like the promise attached to it. A promise no one in this terminal understood. Not yet. Palmer broke the silence. "Colonel Reed, you're going to need to move away from the counter." Marcus lifted his eyes. "I'll move when you tell me what's wrong with my authorization. I've explained that." "No, you haven't." A few passengers behind Marcus shifted. Still, nobody spoke. Palmer's patience hardened into irritation. "Sir, we have other customers." Marcus glanced through the windows. Daniel's transfer case remained visible in the distance beneath the gray morning. He imagined the flag. He imagined the silence surrounding it. Then he heard Denise again. "Bring him home." Marcus touched the coin with one finger. Palmer noticed. His gaze dropped to the battered piece of brass, then returned to Marcus's decorated uniform. For the first time, a faint look of condescension crossed his face. "Whatever personal significance that has, Colonel, it doesn't change airline procedure." Marcus went completely still. Palmer couldn't possibly know what he had just dismissed. He didn't know whose initials were carved into the other side. He didn't know why Marcus had carried that coin through airports, hospitals, military ceremonies, lonely hotel rooms, and years of sleepless nights. And he certainly didn't know what Marcus had promised the night before. Marcus closed his hand around the coin. "You're right," he said quietly. Palmer seemed almost pleased. Then Marcus added, "It doesn't change procedure." He slid his military orders forward again. "But neither does my face." Melissa's eyes snapped toward him. Palmer's expression changed. Behind Marcus, the terminal became so quiet that the wheels of a suitcase could be heard rattling 20 yards away. Marcus didn't accuse him of anything. He didn't need to. He simply stood there, calm and straight, while the scratched coin pressed into his palm. 70 minutes. And somewhere beneath that worn brass was the reason Marcus Reed would not leave this airport without Daniel Brooks. Not today. Not after what Daniel had once done for him. And not after the promise Marcus had made to Daniel's mother only hours before. The promise had been made beneath the weak orange glow of a street lamp. The night before the flight, Marcus had parked outside a modest brick duplex on the south side of Columbus, not far from the roads that carried military traffic toward Fort Moore. The neighborhood was quiet at that hour. Porch lights burned behind thin curtains. An old pickup sat beneath a pecan tree across the street. Somewhere several blocks away, a freight train sounded its horn and rolled slowly through the Georgia darkness. Marcus remained behind the wheel for almost a minute before getting out. He had delivered difficult news before. He had stood beside hospital beds. He had written letters to families after deployments. He had attended ceremonies where folded flags passed from gloved hands to trembling ones. But there was something different about walking toward the home where Daniel Brooks had grown into the man Marcus knew. The front porch light was already on. Patricia Brooks opened the door before Marcus knocked. At 58, Patricia had spent most of her adult life working as a home health aide. Her hands showed it. Strong hands. Patient hands. Hands that had lifted adults from beds, prepared meals, checked medication bottles, and held frightened people steady when their bodies stopped cooperating. That night, those hands were clasped tightly in front of her. "Colonel, Patricia." She stepped aside. "Come in." The living room smelled faintly of furniture polish and coffee that had been sitting too long. A lamp beside the sofa cast warm light over framed photographs on the wall. Daniel in civilian clothes. Daniel in uniform. Daniel at 22 beside Patricia outside the duplex, already taller than she was. There were no photographs of him as a child displayed in the room. Patricia had put those away years earlier when Daniel told her he was tired of visitors seeing him as anything but the grown man he had become. Marcus understood. He removed his cap and held it against his side. Patricia had prepared coffee. Neither of them touched it. For several moments, they simply sat across from each other. Then Patricia reached toward the end table and picked up a photograph. It had been folded once down the middle. This was taken last Christmas. Marcus accepted it. Daniel stood in front of the duplex, wearing jeans and a dark green sweater, one arm around his mother. His smile was crooked, almost reluctant, as though Patricia had called his name a second before the picture was taken. Marcus stared at it longer than he meant to. He hated pictures, Patricia said. Still did. The word escaped before Marcus could correct himself. Still. Not had. Patricia noticed. Her face tightened, but she nodded. I keep doing that too. Marcus lowered his eyes. There were moments when language felt cruel. Past tense was one of them. Patricia folded her hands. They told me you'll be with him. Yes, ma'am. From here? From the transfer through the final handoff, all the way? All the way. She looked toward Daniel's photograph on the wall. I know he's not. She stopped. Marcus waited. I know he can't know who's there. She took a breath. But I keep thinking about him surrounded by strangers. Marcus said nothing. Patricia's voice became smaller. He spent his whole adult life taking care of other people. Even when he came home, he'd stop by after a 12-hour day because my porch light was acting up, or the sink made some noise I couldn't even hear. A faint smile appeared, then disappeared. He didn't like people being alone when something was wrong. Marcus's fingers tightened around the photograph. Patricia looked directly at him. I don't want him alone now. The room became very quiet. Marcus reached into his coat pocket. The brass coin landed softly on the coffee table. Patricia stared at it. She knew the coin. Her fingers moved toward it, then stopped. He gave you that. Marcus nodded. 3 years ago. Patricia rubbed her thumb over Daniel's initials. DB to MR. She turned it over. No one comes home alone. Her breath caught. He told me about this. Marcus looked up. Patricia gave a broken little laugh. He said you'd pretend it didn't mean anything. That sounds like him. He said you saved everybody except yourself. Marcus's expression changed. There were memories attached to those words that he wasn't ready to open yet. Patricia studied him. Colonel Reed. Marcus. She paused, then tried again. Marcus, will you stay with him? He put one hand over the coin. Every mile. Her eyes filled, but she did not look away. Promise me. I promise. Now, inside Columbus Metropolitan Airport, those words returned with such clarity that Marcus could almost smell Patricia's untouched coffee. Every mile. 70 minutes had become 69. Eric Palmer stood across the counter, still wearing the same controlled expression. I'm trying to give you an option, Palmer said. Marcus looked at him. What option? Your travel status remains under review. The transfer doesn't necessarily have to be. Marcus felt something inside him turn cold. Palmer continued as though discussing luggage. The remains can proceed according to the existing transport schedule. Once your status is resolved, you can travel separately. For several seconds, Marcus didn't speak. Melissa Grant stopped typing. Behind Marcus, someone shifted in line. Palmer mistook the silence for consideration. This avoids disruption to the scheduled movement. Marcus looked through the terminal windows. Daniel waited beyond the glass. You're suggesting you send Staff Sergeant Brooks without his assigned escort. I'm suggesting we keep the transportation process moving. Without me, if necessary. Marcus's hand closed around the edge of the counter. Not hard. Just enough for him to feel the cool surface under his palm. He had been insulted before, passed over, questioned, watched more carefully than the man standing beside him. Years of discipline had taught him how to absorb those moments without allowing them to control him. But this was different. This wasn't just happening to Marcus Reed. Palmer was asking him to break his word to a dead soldier and a grieving mother because resolving a supposed security concern was inconvenient. Marcus lifted his eyes. No. Palmer blinked. Excuse me? No. Colonel, I don't think you're understanding. I understand exactly what you're asking. Marcus's voice remained low. The transfer documentation names me as Staff Sergeant Brooks's escort. His family was told I would accompany him. That doesn't supersede airline procedure. Marcus slid the papers forward once again. Then show me the procedure. Palmer's jaw tightened. We're not going in circles. We won't have to if you answer the question. A boarding announcement echoed somewhere above them. Flight to Charlotte. Different airline. Different gate. People moved around the terminal, but the space surrounding Marcus's counter had become strangely still. Palmer looked past Marcus. More people were watching now. That seemed to irritate him. "Colonel Reed, if you continue holding up this line, I'm going to have to ask you to step away. I am not holding the line. You are holding my reservation." Palmer leaned closer. "You're becoming difficult." The words landed softly. Marcus felt them anyway. Difficult. Another word he knew. Another word that could mean almost anything once someone in authority decided it belonged to you. He took one slow breath, then another. His mother's voice from years ago crossed his mind. His first civilian supervisor. The warehouse office. A complaint turned into an accusation. He pushed those memories down. This wasn't the time. He opened his hand. The brass coin lay in his palm. Daniel's initials stared back at him. Every mile. Marcus placed the coin beside the photograph Patricia had given him, which was tucked inside the clear sleeve of his escort folder. For the first time, Melissa saw the picture. Daniel smiling beside his mother. Her face changed. Palmer didn't look at it. He looked only at Marcus. "Last chance," Palmer said. "Step aside voluntarily, or I'll have someone move you from the counter." The terminal seemed to hold its breath. Marcus stared at the man across from him. He could make a call. One call. People far above Eric Palmer's pay grade would answer. But Marcus didn't reach for his phone. Not yet. Because somewhere beneath his anger was a question he needed answered. Would this airline do the right thing because it was right, or only after learning how much power the quiet black man in front of them actually carried? Marcus picked up Daniel's photograph. He slid it carefully back into the folder. Then he looked at Palmer. "I'm not leaving him." Palmer's expression hardened. "Then we may have a bigger problem." Marcus glanced at the departure board. 68 minutes. For the first time that morning, the flight itself no longer felt like the only thing running out of time. So was Eric Palmer's chance to correct what he had started. Palmer's eyes narrowed. "Colonel Reed, I'm trying to keep this professional." Marcus almost smiled at the irony. He didn't. Instead, he rested his hands on the counter and kept them where everyone could see them. "So am I." Melissa Grant remained frozen beside the computer. The glow from the monitor washed her face pale blue as she stared at Marcus's reservation. Whatever she saw there did not appear to match Palmer's confidence. Marcus noticed. "Ms. Grant." Melissa looked up. "Is there a problem showing on my reservation?" Palmer answered before she could. "That's an internal matter." Marcus kept his gaze on Melissa. "I asked her." A faint tension passed through her face. She turned back to the screen. I don't see anything that explains..." "Melissa?" Palmer said her name quietly. That was all. She stopped. Marcus watched the exchange. Something inside him settled into certainty. This was no misunderstanding. Not anymore. Palmer stepped from behind the counter and moved toward the opening at the end of the service desk. His polished shoes clicked against the tile. "Sir, step aside." Marcus turned slightly to face him. "I'm waiting for an explanation." "You've been given one?" "No. I've been given several different phrases." Palmer folded his arms. "Verification concern." Marcus nodded once. "Before that, security protocol." "Same issue." "Then you said management discretion." Palmer's jaw tightened. Marcus continued, his voice still level. "Which is it?" Passengers had stopped pretending not to listen. A woman holding a paper coffee cup turned fully toward them. A man near the departures screen lowered his phone from his ear. Two travelers at the end of the line exchanged a look and said nothing. The silence was becoming its own presence. Marcus could feel it pressing against his back. Palmer could feel it too. That seemed to make him louder. "Sir, you're disrupting airport operations." Marcus stared at him. "I haven't raised my voice. You are refusing instructions. I'm asking why I can't fulfill military orders your airline already accepted." Palmer took another step closer. "You're making this more difficult than it needs to be." There it was again. Difficult. The word struck a place Marcus had spent years learning how to protect. For half a second, Columbus Metropolitan disappeared. He was 31 again. Not Colonel Reed. Not even Major Reed. Just Marcus. newly returned from an early stretch of active service and working nights at a civilian distribution warehouse while helping his mother through a difficult financial year. The warehouse had smelled of cardboard dust, diesel exhaust, and burnt coffee. Marcus remembered the break room clock. 2:17 a.m. He remembered standing in a cramped supervisor's office with a schedule sheet in his hand. Black workers on his shift had been assigned mandatory weekend rotations 3 times as often as others doing the same job. Marcus had checked the records before speaking. He had brought dates, names, hours, numbers. His supervisor, an adult man in his 40s, had barely looked at them. "You people always think somebody's after you." Marcus had stayed calm. That had only irritated the man more. Marcus reported the pattern. 3 days later, the schedule issue disappeared. 2 weeks later, Marcus was called into human resources. His file suddenly described him as confrontational, uncooperative, aggressive toward management. He remembered sitting under buzzing fluorescent lights while a woman who had never worked beside him read those words aloud, as though they described someone else. His employment ended that afternoon. No shouting, no dramatic confrontation, just a cardboard box containing a coffee mug, 2 work gloves, and a photograph of his mother. Years later, Marcus could still remember carrying that box to his car while people from his shift watched through the warehouse windows. Nobody came outside. Nobody said anything. He had promised himself then that nobody would ever teach him to confuse silence with surrender. The airport rushed back around him. Palmer was still talking. "If you refuse to cooperate, I can involve airport security." Marcus looked at him calmly. "Cooperate with what?" "Moving away from the service area." "Why?" "Because I'm instructing you to." Marcus let that answer sit between them. There it was. Not policy. Not security. Authority. Palmer had finally stopped pretending. Melissa shifted behind the counter. "Eric, his flight is still showing confirmed." Palmer spun toward her. "I said I'll handle it. But the escort notation is attached and—" "Melissa." This time the warning was sharper. She stopped again. Marcus looked toward the departure board. 65 minutes. Flight 237 remained on time. Outside, clouds hung low over the runway. Ground vehicles moved across wet pavement, their yellow warning lights flashing through the gray morning. Daniel's transfer case remained in the secured area. Marcus couldn't see the entire flag now, because a baggage vehicle had moved partly into his line of sight. For some reason, that bothered him deeply. He took the scratched brass coin into his palm beneath the edge of the counter. The worn metal grounded him. "No one comes home alone." Palmer stepped closer. "Last time, Colonel, step aside." Marcus lifted his eyes. "No." Several heads turned. Palmer stared at him as if he had been challenged publicly. "Excuse me?" Marcus's voice remained almost gentle. "You have my identification. You have my military orders. You have the escort authorization. Your own employee just confirmed my reservation remains active." Melissa looked down. Marcus continued. "If you can identify a legitimate issue, I'll cooperate with whatever lawful verification is required." He paused. "But I will not walk away from this counter simply because asking you to explain yourself makes you uncomfortable." A soft murmur moved through the line. Palmer's cheeks colored. "You're twisting this. I'm repeating what happened. You don't understand our security responsibilities. Then help me understand. I don't owe you an explanation of every operational decision I make." Marcus studied him. "No. But if your operational decision separates a fallen soldier from his assigned escort, you should probably be able to explain why." The coffee cup woman looked down. A man in a gray jacket shifted his weight. Still no one spoke. The silence hurt Marcus more than he wanted to admit. Not because he needed strangers to rescue him. He didn't. But he knew this silence too. The warehouse windows. The co-workers who had watched him carry the cardboard box. The people who privately admitted later that they knew the schedule was wrong. They had all been sorry afterward. Silence was easy until someone else paid for it. Palmer turned toward the line. "Folks, I apologize for the delay. We're dealing with a passenger compliance issue." "Passenger compliance." Marcus felt the words move through the crowd. Now Palmer was giving everyone a category, a reason not to ask questions. Marcus saw an older traveler frown. Another person looked at Marcus's medals, then at Palmer. But nobody stepped forward. Palmer turned back. There. Now you're affecting other passengers. Marcus said nothing. Move away from the counter. Nothing. You are not boarding this aircraft while this review is active. Marcus's eyes narrowed. Who activated the review? Palmer paused. It was tiny. Barely there. But Marcus saw it. Melissa saw it too. Her eyes moved from Palmer to the reservation screen. Marcus felt the first thread of something new enter the room. Not proof, not yet. But hesitation. Palmer recovered quickly. That's internal. Marcus looked toward Melissa. She was staring at the screen again. This time, not passively. Reading. Searching. Palmer noticed. Melissa, close that record. Her hand moved toward the keyboard, then stopped. Marcus watched her. So did Palmer. The terminal announcement system chimed overhead, followed by a calm voice calling another flight to board. Marcus checked the clock. 63 minutes. Palmer's patience broke another inch. If you remain here, I'm calling airport police. Marcus met his eyes. Then call them. A visible reaction passed through the waiting passengers. Palmer hadn't expected that. Marcus continued before he could answer. And when they arrive, I'll give them the same documents I gave you. Palmer's face hardened. You really want to do this? Marcus looked through the window toward Daniel. No. His voice softened. I wanted to escort a soldier home. That sentence drained the room of movement. Even Palmer said nothing for a moment. Marcus looked back at him. You're the one turning it into something else. Palmer reached for the phone behind the counter. Melissa suddenly leaned closer to her monitor. A small crease appeared between her eyebrows. She clicked once, then again. Whatever she had found made her sit straighter. Palmer lifted the receiver. Marcus saw Melissa's face change. Confusion first, then concern, then something that looked very much like fear. She turned toward Palmer. Eric? He ignored her and began dialing airport security. Melissa looked at the screen one more time, then back at him. Eric, wait. Palmer stopped with the phone halfway to his ear. What? Melissa swallowed. Her voice was barely above a whisper. There's something here you need to see. Marcus said nothing. Neither did the passengers. But for the first time since he reached that counter, Eric Palmer looked uncertain. And Marcus understood that whatever Melissa had just found might finally answer the question which Palmer had spent the morning refusing to answer. Who had actually decided Marcus Reed was a security problem? Melissa's lips parted, but before she could speak, Palmer lowered the phone and stepped between her and the monitor. What did you find? She glanced toward Marcus. Palmer noticed. Melissa. Her eyes dropped. I just need to check something. Then check it. His voice had changed. Not louder. Sharper. Marcus recognized the difference immediately. Palmer was nervous now. Melissa began typing again. Palmer remained beside her, close enough to see every movement of her hands. Marcus watched both of them. So did 47 other adults scattered through the check-in area. Marcus did not know the exact number yet. He only saw faces. A woman in a gray business coat clutching a laptop bag. 2 contractors in work boots holding paper coffee cups. An older couple standing beside matching suitcases. A tall Asian-American woman in a navy blazer who had raised her phone twice and lowered it both times. A man wearing a faded red Marine Corps cap. They were close enough to hear, close enough to understand. And still, the terminal remained silent. Palmer turned toward Marcus again. Sir, this has gone far enough. Marcus looked at the phone in Palmer's hand. You haven't called security. I will if necessary. Then why did you stop? Palmer's expression hardened. Because my employee believes there may be an internal notation that requires review. An internal notation you didn't know about? Palmer hesitated. Marcus saw several passengers react. Small movements. Eyes narrowing. Heads turning. The story Palmer had been telling was beginning to lose its shape. But no one challenged him. Not yet. Marcus looked toward the tall woman in the navy blazer. Her name was Rachel Kim, 31, though Marcus did not know that. Rachel had been on her way to Atlanta for a regional sales meeting. Her suitcase stood beside her right foot, and her boarding pass was tucked beneath the clear case of her phone. She had recorded 12 seconds earlier. Marcus had seen the screen. Then she stopped. Now her thumb rested against the camera icon again. Rachel looked at Palmer, then at Marcus. then at the medals on Marcus's chest. Her face tightened with discomfort, but she did not raise the phone. Marcus looked away. He did not blame her personally. That was almost worse, because this was how these moments survived. Not through one cruel person alone, through rooms full of decent people convincing themselves that someone else would say something. Marcus knew that silence. He had carried a cardboard box past it years ago. Now Daniel Brooks was waiting beyond the glass, while Marcus stood inside another room full of witnesses. 62 minutes. Palmer placed the phone back on its cradle. "Colonel Reed, I'm offering you a final opportunity to step away peacefully." Marcus's eyebrows lifted slightly. "Peacefully? You know what I mean." "I'd like to hear what you mean." Palmer sighed dramatically and looked toward the passengers. "You're creating tension." Marcus turned his head slowly. For the first time, he looked directly at the people behind him. No one met his eyes for long. A man stared into his coffee. The older woman adjusted the handle on her suitcase. Rachel looked down at her phone. Only the man in the Marine cap held Marcus's gaze. He was around 67, broad through the shoulders despite his age, with a weathered face and a white mustache trimmed close over his upper lip. Thomas Walker had been standing 8 places back when the dispute began. He had served 24 years in the Marine Corps before retiring. He knew enough about military movement to understand what he was looking at. More importantly, he recognized the insignia associated with casualty escort duty. Thomas had watched Marcus answer every question calmly. He had watched Palmer provide no actual explanation. He had watched dozens of people decide that silence was safer than involvement. His jaw had been tightening for almost 10 minutes. Palmer lifted his voice. "Everyone, I apologize again for the delay. We're resolving a compliance matter." Thomas's expression changed. Marcus saw it. Palmer continued. "We should have the line moving shortly." Thomas looked beyond Marcus toward the windows. A sliver of red and white was visible on the tarmac. He took off his cap. Not dramatically, almost unconsciously. Then he stepped out of line. Palmer saw him approaching. "Sir, please remain in the queue." Thomas kept walking. "I'm fine right here. This is a private matter." Thomas stopped several feet from Marcus. He looked at Marcus first. Not at the medals, at his face. "You escorting one of ours?" Marcus answered quietly. "Staff Sergeant Daniel Brooks." Thomas nodded. "Army?" "Yes." "Coming home?" Marcus looked toward the window. "Yes." Thomas's mouth tightened. Then he faced Palmer. "What's the problem?" Palmer squared his shoulders. "Sir, as I said, this is an internal airline matter." Thomas glanced at Marcus's documents. "Looks like he's got orders." "He does." "ID?" "Yes." "Confirmed reservation?" Palmer's face changed slightly. "Sir," Thomas repeated the question. "Confirmed reservation?" Melissa spoke before Palmer could stop her. "Yes." The word was quiet, but everyone heard it. Thomas looked at Palmer. "So what's wrong?" Palmer's patience cracked. "There are additional factors you're not aware of." "Name one." "I'm not discussing security procedures with random passengers." Thomas nodded slowly. "Fair enough." For a second, Palmer seemed relieved. Then Thomas pointed through the glass. "That man out there doesn't get to speak for himself." The terminal went still. Thomas's voice never rose. "He can't come in here and ask why the officer assigned to stay with him is being stopped." Palmer's face reddened. "Sir, you're interfering." Thomas ignored him. He looked again at Marcus, then at the worn brass coin on the counter, then at the escort papers. When he spoke again, there was something different in his voice. Not anger, recognition. "Are you separating that officer from the soldier he was ordered to bring home?" The question moved through the terminal like a current. Rachel Kim finally raised her phone. This time, she did not lower it. Her camera caught Palmer's face. Melissa behind him. Marcus standing motionless. Thomas in his faded Marine cap. And 46 other adults who had been close enough to hear everything, but had said nothing. A recording icon appeared on Rachel's screen. Palmer saw it. "Ma'am, you need to stop filming airline personnel." Rachel swallowed. Her hand shook slightly. Why? This is a security matter. Marcus watched her. Rachel looked at him. Something passed between them. She steadied the phone. I don't see any restricted area. Palmer took a step toward her. Ma'am. Thomas moved half a step sideways. Not threatening, just present. Leave her be. Palmer looked around. For the first time, the room no longer belonged entirely to him. One of the contractors lifted his phone. Then the woman with the coffee cup did the same. A man near the departure board stopped pretending to make a call and turned his camera toward the counter. The silence had not broken completely, but it had cracked. Palmer felt it. Marcus could see that clearly. So Palmer reached for the only lever he had left. Fine. He picked up the airport service phone again. If that's how everyone wants to handle this, I'll get airport police involved. Rachel's camera stayed raised. Thomas folded his arms. Marcus did not move. Palmer spoke into the receiver. This is Eric Palmer at Main Ticketing. I need an officer at Counter 4. We have a passenger refusing management instructions. Marcus looked at the phone, then at Palmer. Tell them why. Palmer ignored him. A passenger is refusing to leave the service area and creating a disturbance. The words were calm, professional, and false enough to make Melissa stare at him. Thomas let out a breath through his nose. Rachel's camera captured that too. Marcus felt the old warehouse memory rise again. Aggressive, uncooperative, confrontational, different building, same machinery. He touched the brass coin in his palm. Daniel's initials pressed into his skin. Then Palmer hung up. An officer is on the way. Marcus nodded once. Good. Palmer blinked. Good. Now there'll be another witness. A few people murmured. Palmer said nothing. Melissa stared at her monitor. Whatever she had found earlier was still there. Marcus could see that she wanted to speak, but fear kept winning. For now, the departure board refreshed again. 60 minutes. Exactly. 1 hour remained before Flight 237 closed. Outside, the gray sky pressed low over the runway. Inside, 47 adults watched a black colonel stand beside perfect paperwork while a manager who could not identify a single invalid document called the police on him. And for the first time that morning, the question was no longer whether Marcus would step aside. It was what the next person with authority would do when they arrived and saw the truth for themselves. Officer Laura Bennett arrived 4 minutes later. She was 38, dressed in the dark uniform of Columbus Airport Police, with a radio clipped high on her shoulder and a small notebook tucked behind her belt. She approached without rushing, her eyes moving first to Eric Palmer, then to the gathering passengers, then finally to Marcus. Marcus noticed the order. He had learned to notice such things. Palmer stepped toward her before she reached the counter. Officer, thank you. This gentleman has refused repeated instructions to leave the service area. Laura looked at Marcus. Marcus stood exactly where he had been standing, both hands resting openly on the counter. No shouting, no aggressive posture, no blocked doorway, no disturbance except the one Palmer kept describing. Laura glanced toward Rachel Kim's raised phone. Anyone hurt? No, Palmer said. Threats? Palmer hesitated. He has been non-compliant. Laura's gaze returned to Marcus. Sir, may I ask your name? Colonel Marcus Reed. Her eyes briefly moved across his uniform. Colonel, can you tell me what's happening? Palmer opened his mouth. Laura held up one hand. I asked him. Something shifted in the room. Marcus appreciated the gesture without showing it. He slid his papers across the counter. I'm the assigned escort for Staff Sergeant Daniel Brooks. His remains are scheduled to travel on Flight 237. My military orders, escort authorization, government identification, and confirmed reservation are all here. Laura read the first page, then the second. Her expression remained neutral. What's the airline saying is wrong? That's what I've been asking. Laura looked toward Palmer. He folded his arms. There was a security concern. What concern? Internal verification. Laura looked back at the documents. Did anything fail? Palmer's jaw tightened. It's more complicated than that. Marcus heard Thomas Walker let out a low breath behind him. Laura did too. She turned slightly. Everyone give us room, please. Nobody moved much. Rachel continued filming. The digital clock above the departures board changed. 56 minutes. Marcus looked through the windows. The damp tarmac reflected the gray sky like dull steel. Daniel was still waiting. Laura handed Marcus's identification back. "Colonel, I'm not seeing anything here that explains why police were requested." Palmer immediately replied, "Because he refused management instructions." "What instructions?" "To step away while we completed our review." Laura looked around the counter. Was he preventing service to other passengers? Palmer hesitated again. His presence was escalating the situation. Thomas spoke from behind Rachel. "His presence?" Palmer turned. "I already told you not to interfere." Thomas's face remained calm. "You called police because a man wouldn't walk away from his own ticket." Laura raised her hand. "Sir, please, let me sort this out." Thomas nodded and stepped back, but the damage to Palmer's explanation was already done. Laura turned toward Melissa. "Ms. Grant. Melissa Grant, can you show me the reservation status?" Palmer immediately stepped closer. "Officer, that's proprietary airline information." Laura looked at him. "I'm not asking for your whole system. I'm asking whether the passenger you're accusing of refusing instructions has an active reservation." Melissa's eyes moved toward Palmer, then back to Laura. "Yes." The word landed harder this time. Laura frowned. "Any active security alert?" Melissa swallowed. Palmer spoke sharply. "Melissa, don't speculate. I'm not..." Her fingers moved across the keyboard. Rachel's phone caught the faint clicking. Marcus watched Melissa's shoulders. They were tense enough to show through her uniform blouse. She had been afraid for most of the morning, but fear was beginning to compete with something else. "Conscience." Laura stepped beside the monitor, careful not to cross behind the employee counter. "What does it show?" Melissa clicked through another screen. "His reservation was ticketed yesterday. Military escort notation attached at 4:18 p.m. Identity verification completed. Escort authorization verified." Laura looked at Palmer. "So where's the security problem?" Palmer's face stiffened. There was an additional review flag. Melissa stopped moving. Marcus saw it immediately. So did Laura. "What?" Laura asked. Melissa stared at the screen. "There is a hold. Palmer seized on it." "Exactly." Melissa shook her head. "No." Palmer turned toward her. "What do you mean, no?" She leaned closer. Marcus could see lines of text reflected faintly in her glasses. "Security holds have a different code." Palmer's face changed, only slightly. "But enough." Melissa clicked again. "This isn't security, Melissa." She ignored him. For the first time all morning, she ignored him. Her finger traced something on the monitor. "It's a discretionary station hold." Rachel moved half a step closer, keeping her camera steady. Laura's voice became more serious. "What's that mean?" Melissa took a breath. "It means station management can temporarily stop a passenger from being processed for certain operational reasons." Palmer cut in. "Which is exactly what I've been explaining." Marcus looked at Melissa. "Who entered it?" The terminal became very still. Melissa didn't answer immediately. Palmer stepped toward the keyboard. "That's enough." Laura shifted between him and Melissa. "Don't touch the screen." Palmer stopped. His face reddened. "This is my station, and right now I'm trying to understand why you called me." Melissa looked down again. There was a field near the bottom of the record. User ID time entered. Authorization source. Her face went pale. Marcus knew before she spoke. Maybe Palmer did too. "Eric." Palmer's voice became low. "Melissa, stop." She looked at him. "You entered this." Nobody moved. Not Thomas. Not Rachel. Not Marcus. Even the sound of rolling suitcases seemed to disappear. Palmer stared at her. "Be careful." Melissa's hands trembled. "You entered the hold at 6:41 this morning." Marcus looked at the airport clock. He had approached the counter only minutes before that. Laura's eyes narrowed. Was that before or after Colonel Reed presented his documents? Melissa checked. After. Thomas whispered something under his breath. Rachel's camera remained fixed on Palmer. Marcus felt no satisfaction, only a strange heaviness. The answer he had been asking for was finally visible. And it was worse than a computer mistake. There had never been a security system stopping him. There had never been an automated alert. There had never been some unseen federal verification problem requiring patience. There had been a man, a decision, a keyboard. Palmer recovered quickly. As station manager, I have authority to place discretionary holds. Laura looked at him. For what reason? Operational concerns? What concerns? I don't have to justify internal airline decisions to airport police. You called airport police. Palmer's mouth closed. A murmur moved through the crowd. Rachel spoke without lowering her phone. So there wasn't a security alert? Palmer turned on her. This does not involve you. Rachel's voice shook, but she kept filming. You told everyone it was security. I told you to stop recording. Laura looked at Rachel. She's in a public ticketing area. Let her record. Palmer stared at the officer. For the first time, real fear entered his expression. Not because Marcus had threatened him. Marcus hadn't. Not because the crowd had turned violent. It hadn't. Because the story Palmer had built was collapsing one fact at a time. Melissa scrolled farther. Her face tightened again. There's no reason entered. Marcus looked at her. What? The hold requires a reason code. She clicked. This one has none. Laura's expression hardened. So he manually stopped a confirmed passenger with verified escort documentation and didn't record why. Melissa nodded slowly. Palmer's voice rose. I made a judgment call. Marcus finally spoke. Based on what? Palmer looked at him. Marcus's voice remained quiet. Not my identification. Silence. Not my orders. Palmer said nothing. Not my reservation. Nothing. Not a security alert. Palmer's jaw tightened. Marcus held his gaze. So what did you see that made you decide I shouldn't fly? The question hung beneath the fluorescent lights. Palmer looked toward the crowd. 47 witnesses. Several phones were raised now. But Marcus wasn't looking at them. He was looking only at Palmer. He could have pushed harder. Could have named the conclusion everyone was beginning to reach. Instead, Marcus gave him room to answer. Palmer refused it. This conversation is over. He reached toward the computer. Melissa stepped back. Laura moved between them again. No. Nobody changes that record. Palmer stared at her. What did you say? You created a hold, called police, and described the passenger as a security concern. That record is staying exactly as it is until this is documented. Rachel's camera captured every word. Palmer's face drained. Marcus looked at the departure board. 52 minutes. Time was still disappearing. The truth had emerged, but Daniel was no closer to home. Marcus gathered his papers slowly. The scratched brass coin remained beside them. Palmer noticed it again. This time his gaze lingered. Perhaps because the room had changed. Perhaps because Marcus had changed in his eyes. But he still did not understand what the coin represented. He did not understand Daniel's initials. He did not understand the promise. And instead of admitting what he had done, Eric Palmer made the choice that would carry the confrontation past the point where an ordinary apology could repair it. He straightened his tie. Then he looked directly at Marcus. The hold stays. Melissa stared at him. Laura stared at him. Thomas took one slow step forward. Marcus did not move. Palmer continued. And if necessary, the soldier's remains can travel without you. Marcus's fingers closed around the scratched brass coin. For the first time that morning, the pain in his face was visible. Only for a second. But Rachel's camera caught it. And Eric Palmer had no idea that the piece of battered brass in Marcus Reed's hand was about to explain why separating those two men was something Marcus would never allow. Marcus opened his hand. The challenge coin rested against his palm, dull beneath the terminal lights. For most of the morning, everything else Marcus had placed on that counter had been official. Orders, identification, escort authorization, a confirmed reservation, documents carrying signatures, seals, codes, and institutional authority. None of them had changed Eric Palmer's mind. The coin carried none of those things. It was scratched along one edge and worn almost smooth around the rim. Anyone passing by could have mistaken it for something bought from a military surplus store. Marcus looked at Daniel's initials. DB to MR. His thumb moved across them once, and he placed the coin on the counter between himself and Palmer. The faint metallic click seemed louder than it should have. Palmer glanced down. "What is this?" Marcus did not answer immediately. Behind him, Rachel continued recording. Thomas Walker stood with his Marine cap pressed against his side now, his face solemn. Officer Laura Bennett watched quietly. Melissa Grant had gone pale behind her computer. Marcus turned the coin over. The engraved words faced Palmer. "No one comes home alone." Palmer read them. His expression barely changed. "I don't understand what this has to do with your reservation." Marcus looked through the terminal glass. 49 minutes remained. Outside, the gray morning had brightened slightly, but the clouds still hung low over the runway. Ground crews moved in fluorescent jackets near distant aircraft. Daniel Brooks waited beneath the flag. Marcus returned his gaze to the coin. 3 years ago, he said, Staff Sergeant Brooks and I were deployed overseas. The terminal grew quieter. Palmer looked impatient. Marcus continued anyway. "We were traveling with 2 other soldiers, both adults. Good men. Experienced." His voice slowed. "There was an attack on our convoy. He did not describe the worst of it. He did not need to. YouTube cameras, airline counters, and waiting travelers were not the place for graphic memories that Marcus himself rarely allowed to surface. He spoke only of heat. Smoke. A vehicle that had become impossible to remain inside. Marcus had been disoriented. One of the other soldiers had injured his leg badly enough that he could not get out without help. The second had been stunned and struggling to understand where he was. "And Daniel?" Thomas asked quietly. Marcus looked at him. Daniel got out first. Thomas seemed to understand what was coming. Marcus's eyes returned to the coin. He could have stayed out. A pause. He went back. Rachel's phone did not move. He pulled the first soldier clear, then the second. Marcus swallowed. And then he came back for me. Palmer shifted slightly. Marcus remembered the sensation even now. Daniel's hand gripping the back of his gear. A voice through smoke. "Move, Colonel. Move." Marcus had spent years commanding people to keep going. That day, Daniel Brooks had been the one refusing to leave him behind. He got all 3 of us away from that vehicle. Marcus's voice became quieter. Afterward, I tried to recommend him for recognition. A faint expression crossed Marcus's face, almost a smile. He got angry with me. Thomas raised an eyebrow. "Angry?" Marcus nodded. Said he hadn't done anything the others wouldn't have done. That sounded familiar to Thomas. He gave the smallest nod. Marcus touched the coin. A few weeks later, he handed me this. He remembered Daniel standing outside a temporary operations building in the late afternoon heat. 25 years old then. Dust on his boots. A grin he used whenever he wanted to make something serious sound like a joke. Marcus had turned the coin over and read the engraving. "DB to MR, no one comes home alone." Daniel had laughed. "Insurance policy, sir." Marcus had frowned. "For what?" "If my luck ever runs out before yours, don't let them ship me home with strangers." Marcus had stared at him. Daniel's smile faded. Just slightly. "I'm serious." Marcus had slipped the coin into his pocket. So am I. The memory disappeared. The airport returned. Marcus looked at Palmer. Last night, I sat with his mother. Something in Palmer's expression finally weakened. Only a fraction. Marcus continued. Patricia Brooks asked me if I would stay with her son all the way home. He paused. I promised her I would. The words settled over the counter. Every mile. Marcus didn't say them yet. He didn't have to. Palmer looked at the coin again. For one moment, it seemed possible he finally understood. Then he straightened. I respect your personal connection to the deceased. Marcus's eyes changed. Thomas looked sharply at Palmer. Palmer continued. But emotional considerations do not override station authority. Rachel's lips parted in disbelief. Melissa looked down. Laura's jaw tightened. Marcus remained completely still. Emotional considerations, he repeated. I'm not trying to be insensitive. Thomas let out a bitter breath. You might want to try harder. Palmer ignored him. Colonel Reed, I have already explained that I have the authority to impose an operational hold. Laura stepped closer. With no reason code. Palmer looked at her. That will be addressed internally. Marcus spoke. After Daniel leaves without me? If that's what the schedule requires? Silence. Palmer gestured toward the coin. That doesn't change airline policy. Marcus stared at him. The words struck harder than the original denial. Not because Palmer had insulted Marcus, because he had listened to what Daniel had done, heard what Patricia had asked, looked at the promise Daniel had placed into Marcus's hand years earlier, and reduced it all to an inconvenience. Marcus picked up the coin. He held it between his thumb and forefinger. You're right. Palmer seemed surprised. Marcus looked at the battered brass. This doesn't change your policy. Then he raised his eyes. But your policy never stopped me. Palmer's face tightened. You placed the hold. Rachel's camera captured every word. You decided I was a problem after I arrived. Marcus's voice remained calm. No automated system rejected my identification. Nothing from Palmer. No military verification failed. Nothing. No security agency contacted you. Palmer's mouth hardened. Marcus slipped the coin back into his palm. So stop calling this policy. The terminal felt electric. Palmer looked around and saw more phones raised. His embarrassment was becoming anger. You don't get to dictate how this station operates. I'm not trying to. Then step aside. No. Palmer laughed once without humor, still refusing. I'm fulfilling my orders. You are a commercial passenger standing in my terminal. Thomas's head turned sharply. Marcus noticed the word my, not the airlines, not the airports, my terminal. There it was again. This had stopped being about rules long ago. It was about Palmer needing Marcus to yield. Palmer stepped closer to the counter. You seem to think your uniform gives you special treatment. Marcus looked down at himself. For the first time that morning, he seemed almost tired of the fabric on his shoulders. No. Palmer scoffed. Marcus's answer came softly. I think the paperwork gives me authorization. A few passengers murmured. And I think the man outside deserves the dignity of having his assigned escort beside him. Marcus looked directly at Palmer. My rank has nothing to do with either one. That silenced the room again. Laura studied Marcus. Rachel steadied her phone. Thomas's face carried something close to pride. Palmer's expression did not soften. Then perhaps you should understand that rank doesn't intimidate me. Marcus almost looked puzzled. It wasn't supposed to. Palmer had nowhere to go with that. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Melissa's computer emitted a quiet electronic tone. She glanced down. A new message had appeared inside the reservation record. Her eyes narrowed. Another notification followed. Then another. Marcus heard his phone vibrate inside his uniform jacket at nearly the same moment. Once. Stopped. Then again. He knew the number before he looked. Army Casualty Affairs. Major Rebecca Foster. Marcus removed the phone slowly. Palmer saw the military contact information on the screen. A faint smirk appeared on his face. So now you're calling someone? Marcus looked at him. I didn't call anyone. The smirk disappeared. His phone continued vibrating in Marcus's hand. Melissa stared at her monitor. Eric. Palmer looked back. What now? She clicked the first notification, then the second. Her confusion deepened. There are military coordination messages coming into the operations record. Palmer frowned. From where? I don't know yet. Another notification appeared. Melissa leaned closer. Rachel's camera caught the screen only as reflected light, not the confidential information itself. Marcus looked again at Rebecca Foster's name. He could answer. With one sentence, he could bring the full weight of his command structure into the terminal. Instead, he let the phone ring. Thomas watched him. Colonel? Marcus shook his head slightly. Not yet. Palmer saw the gesture and misread it completely. His confidence returned. That's what I thought. Marcus looked at him. Palmer gave a thin smile. Nobody's coming to fix this for you. Marcus felt Daniel's coin press into his palm. He thought of Patricia, Morning Star, Walter's crooked walker, Helen's grocery bags, the cardboard box from the warehouse years ago, all the moments when dignity had mattered precisely because nobody powerful was watching. Marcus finally answered the phone. Reed. Major Rebecca Foster's voice came through clear and controlled. Colonel, we've received an interruption notice on Staff Sergeant Brooks's escort itinerary. Marcus looked through the glass. Daniel waited. Rebecca continued. Do you need me to activate senior command? Marcus's eyes settled on Eric Palmer. Palmer stood behind his counter, still believing this was his room, his rules, his decision. Marcus answered quietly. No, Major. Rebecca paused. Sir? Not yet. Across the counter, Melissa's computer sounded again. Another secure notification, then another. Marcus never looked away from Palmer. Give them one last chance. And somewhere far beyond the ticket counter, the first consequences of Eric Palmer's decision had already begun moving. Major Rebecca Foster was silent for 2 seconds. Marcus knew her well enough to understand what those 2 seconds meant. At 41, Rebecca had spent years with Army casualty affairs, where mistakes were measured differently than they were in ordinary travel. A delayed suitcase could be replaced. A missed business meeting could be rescheduled. A fallen soldier's final journey was neither luggage nor business. Colonel, she said carefully, I need to be certain I heard you correctly. You did. You want me to wait? Yes. Marcus turned slightly away from the counter, though not far enough to lose sight of Daniel's transfer case beyond the windows. Rebecca lowered her voice. Your escort itinerary triggered an interruption notice. The transfer coordination is already asking questions. I know. We have 46 minutes before this becomes more than an airline problem. Marcus checked the clock. 46. The number seemed smaller when someone else said it. Rebecca continued. I can escalate this now. Marcus knew exactly what she meant. Senior command, airport operations, military transportation. One call would move the dispute out of Eric Palmer's hands so quickly, the station manager might not understand what had happened until it was over. Marcus looked across the counter. Palmer was pretending not to listen. He wasn't convincing. Melissa, meanwhile, stared at the notifications stacking across her screen. Marcus said, Not yet. Why? The question carried no challenge, only concern. Marcus's gaze settled on Palmer. Because I shouldn't need to be important for them to do the right thing. Rebecca said nothing. Marcus continued. If I use rank now, they'll solve the problem because of who called. Sir, Daniel's movement has priority. I know. And his mother is expecting, I know. His voice tightened on the last word. Rebecca stopped. Marcus closed his eyes for half a second. Patricia's kitchen returned to him. The untouched coffee. Daniel's photograph. Promise me. Every mile. Marcus opened his eyes. I'm not gambling with Daniel's journey, he said. Give them one last chance to correct it themselves. If they don't, do what you have to do. Rebecca exhaled. Understood. Then her tone changed. More formal. But Colonel, you should know something. Marcus waited. The interruption notification didn't stay inside casualty affairs. His eyes narrowed. What does that mean? The escort record is tied to the regional movement schedule. When the airline hold interrupted your confirmed itinerary, it generated coordination notices automatically. Marcus looked toward Melissa's monitor. How many? I'm still finding out. Across the counter, another soft electronic tone sounded. Melissa whispered, Oh no. Palmer turned. What? She didn't answer. Rebecca continued in Marcus's ear. Stay where you are. Keep your phone on. Major, that's not an escalation request, sir. That's me asking you not to disappear, while several officers try to understand why an authorized casualty escort has been stopped. Marcus glanced at Palmer. I don't think disappearing is going to be a problem. Rebecca almost laughed. Almost. Then her voice softened. How's Daniel? The question caught Marcus unexpectedly. Not where? Not what's the status? How's Daniel? Marcus looked through the window. Still waiting. I'll make sure he doesn't wait alone. Marcus's throat tightened. Thank you. The call ended. He lowered the phone. Palmer gave him a thin smile. Everything all right? Marcus slipped the phone into his jacket. Not particularly. Palmer leaned against the counter, so they couldn't override the hold. Marcus studied him. That was what Palmer had heard. Not yet. Give them one last chance. He had mistaken restraint for failure. Again. Marcus could have corrected him. He chose not to. Melissa suddenly turned her monitor slightly away from the public area. Eric, I need you to look at this. Palmer walked over. What now? These aren't normal messages. What are they? Operations coordination requests. From the airline? No. Palmer's face changed. Melissa scrolled. Army Casualty Affairs. Airport Operations Liaison. Regional Military Transportation. Palmer lowered his voice. Why are they contacting us? Melissa stared at him. You stopped an official escort. I placed a temporary station hold on an official escort. Don't start. I'm not starting anything. Her voice was still quiet, but something inside it had strengthened. I'm telling you what's on the screen. Palmer leaned closer. Respond that we're handling it. Melissa hesitated. Handling what? The situation. What reason do I give them? Palmer didn't answer. Melissa pointed toward the record. There still isn't one. Rachel's camera captured Palmer turning away. Thomas Walker watched from several feet back, arms folded. Officer Laura Bennett remained near the counter, writing notes. Palmer noticed. Officer, there's no reason for you to remain. Laura didn't look up. You called me. The situation is under control. Laura finished writing. I'll decide when I'm done documenting the call. Palmer's mouth tightened. The balance in the room was shifting by inches. Not enough to free Marcus. Enough for Palmer to feel it. Then Rachel's phone vibrated. She glanced at the screen while still recording. Her eyebrows rose. The short video she had posted only minutes earlier was spreading beyond the people in the terminal. Comments were appearing faster than she could read them. Some asked whether the airline had explained the hold. Others focused on Daniel. One message came from an adult veteran who recognized the escort procedure and wrote that separating an assigned escort from a fallen service member was not something to dismiss as ordinary travel inconvenience. Rachel looked at Marcus. Colonel. Marcus shook his head gently. Please don't make this about me. She lowered the phone slightly. It's already getting attention. Then make sure they know Staff Sergeant Brooks's name. Rachel stared at him. Marcus nodded toward the runway. Daniel Brooks. Her expression softened. She typed something with her free hand. Thomas heard the exchange. A faint look of approval crossed his face. Palmer did not share it. Posting incomplete information online can have consequences. Rachel looked up. So can putting fake security holds on people. Several passengers murmured. Palmer's face reddened. I never said it was fake. Melissa spoke without looking at him. It wasn't security. Palmer turned sharply. Marcus saw the moment clearly. The control Palmer had been protecting all morning was slipping, so he reached for it again. Enough. He stepped behind the counter and looked directly at Marcus. The hold remains active. Laura frowned. Even after everything you've learned? Yes. Melissa stared at him. Eric. He ignored her. Marcus asked, Why? Operational discretion. Marcus almost looked weary. We're back to that. Palmer folded his arms. Until I receive instructions from someone with authority over this station, my decision stands. Thomas's eyebrows lifted. Marcus heard the sentence differently. Someone with authority. Palmer still believed authority was the only language that mattered. Marcus looked at the clock. 42 minutes. He could call Rebecca back. He could end Palmer's illusion immediately. Instead, he touched the coin through his pocket. One last chance, Marcus said. Then use those 42 minutes carefully. Palmer frowned. Is that a threat? No. Marcus's voice was quiet. It's time. Before Palmer could respond, Melissa's monitor chimed again. This notification was different. A red-bordered coordination banner appeared across the operations screen. Melissa read it once, then again. Her face lost color. What? Palmer demanded. Melissa didn't answer. What does it say? She looked toward Marcus, then toward the windows. Regional Military Movement Coordination has requested runway access confirmation. Palmer stared at her. For what? Melissa scrolled farther. Her eyes widened. I can't see the full movement order. Then what can you see? Multiple aircraft. The words changed the air. Thomas unfolded his arms. Laura looked up from her notebook. Rachel stopped reading the comments on her phone. Even Marcus felt something tighten inside his chest. He had not requested aircraft. He had specifically refused escalation. Palmer gave a nervous laugh. This is Columbus. We're near Fort Moore. Military aircraft move through here all the time. No one answered. Because he was right. They did. And yet another notification appeared. Then another. Melissa whispered, They're being redirected. Marcus looked at her. Redirected from where? I don't have access to that. Palmer stepped beside her. Destination. Melissa shook her head. Not showing yet. Palmer stared at the screen, then at Marcus. For the first time, he seemed unsure whether Marcus had been telling him the whole truth about who was on the other end of that phone. Marcus hadn't hidden anything. Palmer simply had never asked the right questions. Outside, a ground vehicle changed direction near the far edge of the runway. Another followed. Airport operations personnel began moving toward an area that had been quiet only minutes earlier. Palmer noticed. So did the passengers. Marcus's phone buzzed again. A text from Rebecca. Stay in place. Senior command has been notified through movement control. Marcus read it twice. He had not called them. He had not demanded anything. The system had moved because Daniel's interrupted journey had reached people whose responsibility was to make certain the fallen were treated with dignity. Marcus put the phone away. Palmer watched him. What did they say? Marcus met his eyes. You still have a chance to fix this yourself. Palmer's pride won. The hold stays. Marcus nodded slowly. There was sadness in the gesture now. Not surprise. Sadness. Because Palmer had been given documents, an explanation, a witness, a police officer, his own employee's discovery, and finally the truth about Daniel. Still, he chose the hold. Then a new voice sounded from behind the airline counter. Eric Palmer? Everyone turned. A woman in a charcoal business suit was walking quickly toward them from the secure administrative corridor. She was 50, carried an airline executive badge, and had the strained expression of someone who had been called before breakfast with a problem already growing faster than she could contain. Susan Miller, Regional Operations Executive. Palmer's posture changed immediately. Susan. She did not return the greeting. Her eyes moved over Rachel's camera, Laura's notebook, Thomas's marine cap, Marcus's uniform, and the reservation screen filled with military notifications. Then she looked at Palmer. What exactly have you done? Palmer opened his mouth. Before he could answer, a sound rolled faintly across the airport windows. Low, distant, rhythmic. Marcus turned toward the runway. So did Thomas. The sound disappeared beneath the hum of the terminal almost as quickly as it came, but Thomas's expression changed. He knew rotor noise when he heard it, And whatever was approaching Columbus Metropolitan was still far enough away that nobody could see it yet. Susan Miller stopped beside the counter and looked from Eric Palmer to the computer screen. "Again," she said. "What exactly have you done?" Palmer straightened his shoulders. "I placed a temporary discretionary hold pending verification." Susan's gaze shifted to Melissa. "Security verification?" Melissa swallowed. "No, ma'am." Palmer turned sharply. "Melissa." Susan lifted one hand. "Let her answer." Melissa looked at the reservation history. "There was no security alert. Colonel Reed's identification was verified yesterday. His escort documentation was verified. His reservation was confirmed." Susan's expression went still. "And the hold?" Melissa hesitated. "Eric entered it this morning." Susan looked slowly toward Palmer. "Reason code?" Melissa shook her head. "None." For several seconds, Susan said nothing. That silence was different from the silence of the passengers. The crowd had been afraid to interfere. Susan was calculating damage. Marcus could see it in the way her eyes moved toward Rachel's phone, toward Officer Laura Bennett's notebook, toward Thomas Walker, toward the passengers who now held several cameras pointed in their direction. Then she noticed the operations notifications filling Melissa's screen. "What are those?" "Military movement coordination." Susan's face tightened. "Why?" Palmer answered. "Probably unrelated. We're near Fort Moore." Melissa looked uncomfortable. "They referenced the interrupted escort record." Susan turned toward Marcus for the first time. "Colonel Reed, I'm Susan Miller, Regional Operations Executive. I want to apologize for what appears to be a serious misunderstanding." Marcus said nothing. Susan continued. "I've reviewed enough to know we need to resolve this immediately." Palmer opened his mouth. Susan stopped him with a glance. "Your hold is being removed." A murmur moved through the terminal. Melissa looked almost relieved. Marcus did not. Susan stepped closer to the counter. "We'll get you on to Flight 237 personally. First class." Marcus looked at her. "I didn't purchase first class. It'll be complimentary. I don't need it. Colonel, we'd also like to provide lounge access and arrange a private escort directly to the gate." Thomas Walker looked down. Rachel's phone remained raised. Susan lowered her voice. "We'll make sure there are no further delays." Marcus studied her. 40 minutes ago, the airline could not explain why he had been stopped. Now there were cameras, military notifications, a regional executive, and suddenly there were upgrades. Marcus asked quietly, "Would you be offering any of this if nobody had recorded what happened?" Susan froze. Palmer looked away. Marcus let the question remain unanswered. Would the hold be disappearing? Susan inhaled. "Colonel Reed, I'm trying to correct the situation." "No." Marcus's voice remained calm. "You're trying to contain it." Several people behind him murmured. Susan's professionalism held, but barely. "I assure you that's not my intention." Marcus glanced at Rachel. Her camera started after this had already been going on. Then he looked at Thomas. He spoke after 46 people didn't. Thomas's face tightened. Marcus turned back toward Susan. "Before that, I had the same paperwork." He tapped the documents gently. "Same orders." Another tap, same reservation. His fingers moved to the scratched coin. Same man waiting outside. Susan looked toward the runway. For a second, the corporate executive disappeared and something more human crossed her face. Sorrow. Then the distant rotor sound returned. Louder this time. Thomas turned toward the glass. "That's not one bird." Laura followed his gaze. The low vibration came through the terminal floor before the aircraft themselves appeared. Coffee rippled in a paper cup sitting on an empty chair. A hanging sign trembled almost imperceptibly. Conversations died one by one. Palmer looked toward the windows. "What is that?" Thomas moved closer to the glass. "Military." Susan pulled out her phone. Her screen lit immediately with an operations message. She read it, then read it again. Her face changed. "What?" Palmer asked. Susan didn't answer. Melissa's computer chimed. A runway coordination notice expanded across the screen. She whispered, "Inbound formation." Marcus felt his phone vibrate. Major Rebecca Foster. This time he answered immediately. "Read. Colonel, Senior Command has assumed transportation coordination." Marcus closed his eyes briefly. "You escalated?" "No, sir." Rebecca's answer came quickly. "Movement control did. Your interrupted escort triggered a command review. Brigadier General Bennett was already supervising a regional aviation movement this morning." Marcus looked toward the windows. The first dark shape appeared beneath the clouds. Then another. Rebecca continued. The aircraft were already scheduled for operations in the area. General Bennett redirected the formation after Casualty Affairs confirmed Staff Sergeant Brooks's transfer was at risk. Marcus said nothing. He wants Daniel's movement completed without further uncertainty. Another helicopter emerged. Then another. Black silhouettes against the pale Georgia sky. Thomas counted under his breath. 3. The sound built. 4. Passengers moved toward the windows. 5. Rachel lowered her phone for the first time, staring with her own eyes. 6. The terminal glass began to vibrate softly. 7. Palmer's face had gone pale. 8. Susan stood motionless, one hand still holding her phone. 9. Then the final aircraft appeared through the gray morning. 10. 10 military helicopters moved in disciplined formation beyond the runway, their rotors beating the air into a deep, rhythmic thunder. No one in the terminal spoke. The sight was too large for conversation. Thomas Walker slowly removed his Marine cap. He held it over his heart. Another veteran near the windows did the same. Then another. Marcus remained where he was. He did not smile. He did not lift his chin triumphantly. He looked only toward the secured area where Daniel's flag-draped transfer case waited. Rachel raised her phone again, but her camera was no longer pointed at Palmer. It was pointed through the glass. The formation began its approach under airport control. Susan looked at Marcus as though seeing him for the first time. "Colonel?" Marcus shook his head. "They're not here for me." The words were almost lost beneath the rotor thunder. Susan leaned closer. "What?" Marcus looked at her. "They're not here for me." He pointed toward the transfer case. "They're here for him." Thomas closed his eyes. Rachel's camera caught the flag through the window. Daniel Brooks, 28 years old, coming home. Palmer stared at the helicopters. What kind of officer gets 10 military aircraft sent because he misses a flight? Marcus turned toward him. The question revealed that Palmer still did not understand. Marcus's voice was quiet. "The kind has nothing to do with it." Palmer frowned. Marcus continued. Those aircraft were already operating in the region. Someone with responsibility for Daniel's movement decided his final journey wasn't going to depend on your hold anymore. Susan checked her phone again. A new message had arrived. She read the sender. Her posture changed instantly. Palmer noticed. "Who is it?" Susan didn't answer him. Marcus heard Rebecca's voice still faintly through the phone. "Sir, Major Foster. I'm here. We're coming inside." Marcus looked toward the secured corridor. "We?" "Yes, sir." "Who else?" Rebecca paused. "Command representation." Marcus's expression tightened. He understood enough not to ask more over an open line. "Copy." The call ended. Susan looked down at Marcus's documents again, then at his medals, then at the battered challenge coin. For the first time, she seemed to understand that every visible sign of Marcus's importance might still be the least important thing about him. Behind them, one of Rachel's earlier clips was already spreading far beyond Columbus. The video showed Palmer insisting on a non-existent security concern, Melissa revealing the manual hold, Marcus explaining Daniel's final journey. Now viewers were seeing something new. 10 helicopters descending beyond the airport windows, while the black colonel, who had been publicly treated like an inconvenience, stood perfectly still and refused to make the moment about himself. Palmer looked toward the crowd. The same people who had avoided Marcus's eyes earlier were looking directly at him now. That recognition did not comfort Marcus. It hurt. Because helicopters should not have been necessary. Rank should not have been necessary. A viral recording should not have been necessary. The paperwork should have been enough. His word should have been enough. His dignity should have been enough. Susan took one step toward him. Colonel Reed, I don't know what to say. Marcus looked toward Daniel. Then don't say anything yet. A secure door opened behind the airline counter. Footsteps approached through the corridor. Measured. Purposeful. Palmer turned. Major Rebecca Foster emerged first in uniform. Several military personnel followed her. The terminal quieted again. Rebecca's eyes immediately found Marcus. She stopped several feet away and came to attention. Colonel Reed. Palmer's face changed. Not because Marcus's rank was new. It had been written on his uniform the entire morning. But because for the first time, someone with undeniable authority was treating that rank as real. Rebecca turned toward Susan, then Palmer. Her expression was controlled. Which one of you stopped Staff Sergeant Brooks's escort? Palmer swallowed. Before he could answer, another figure appeared in the corridor behind her, and the way Rebecca stepped aside told Marcus that the next truth Eric Palmer was about to learn would be far bigger than the 10 helicopters outside. Brigadier General James Bennett entered without hurry. He was 58, broad-shouldered, silver beginning to show at his temples, his uniform carrying the quiet authority of a man who had spent decades making decisions where hesitation could cost lives. He did not look toward the cameras first. He looked toward Marcus, then through the terminal windows, toward Daniel. Bennett removed his cap. For one long second, the general simply stood there. The helicopters continued beating the air outside, their distant thunder rolling through the glass. But inside the ticketing area, there was almost complete silence. Then Bennett faced Marcus. Colonel Reed. Marcus came to attention. General. Bennett extended his hand. Marcus took it. There was nothing theatrical about the gesture, yet Palmer seemed to shrink another inch behind the counter. Bennett's eyes dropped briefly to the scratched brass coin in Marcus's hand. Recognition passed through his face. You still carry it? Marcus looked down. Every day. Bennett nodded. That small exchange caught Susan Miller's attention. So did Thomas Walker's. Rachel's camera stayed steady. Palmer stared between the two officers. You know about that coin? Bennett turned. It was the first time he looked directly at Palmer. I know who gave it to him. Palmer swallowed. Bennett walked toward the counter and glanced at Marcus's paperwork. Everything remained exactly where it had been all morning. Orders, identification, escort authorization, confirmed reservation. Nothing new. Nothing that had not already been available to Palmer. Bennett lifted his eyes. Which one of you is Eric Palmer? Palmer straightened. I am. Station manager? Yes, sir. Bennett looked toward Officer Laura Bennett. No relation, Laura said quietly before anyone asked. A faint flicker of humor crossed the general's face, gone almost instantly. Then he returned his attention to Palmer. I've been briefed on the manual hold. Palmer started quickly. General, this has been badly misunderstood. I made a temporary operational decision based on concerns at the time. What concerns? Palmer hesitated. Bennett waited. Nobody rescued him. Finally, Palmer said, Passenger verification. Melissa closed her eyes. Susan Miller looked away. Bennett glanced toward Rebecca. She opened a folder. Colonel Reed's identity was verified yesterday afternoon. His casualty escort authorization was confirmed. His itinerary was approved. No security alert was generated by the airline, the airport, or any federal agency. Palmer shifted his weight. Station managers still have discretion. To do what? To address concerns. Bennett's voice remained almost conversational. What concern did Marcus Reed create? Palmer said nothing. The use of Marcus's name, not rank, was deliberate. Bennett let the silence expose the answer. Then he looked at Rachel. Have you been recording? Rachel nodded. Yes, sir. From the beginning? Not all of it. Thomas spoke from beside her. I was here before she started. Bennett looked at him. Marine? Thomas nodded. Retired. Thank you for speaking up. Thomas looked toward Marcus. Should have done it sooner. Several passengers lowered their eyes. Marcus noticed. Bennett did too. But the general did not shame them. He turned back to Palmer. Do you know why Colonel Reed is the escort? Palmer gestured vaguely toward the documents. Military assignment. That's part of it. Bennett looked at Marcus. Permission? Marcus understood what he was asking. He hesitated. This was exactly what he had tried to avoid all morning. A room suddenly deciding he deserved respect because important people had arrived. But Daniel's story mattered. Marcus gave a small nod. Bennett faced the crowd. Staff Sergeant Daniel Brooks served under Colonel Reed's command. Rachel's phone captured every word. 3 years ago, during an overseas deployment, Staff Sergeant Brooks helped extract 3 adult soldiers from a disabled vehicle under dangerous conditions. Thomas looked toward the challenge coin. Bennett continued. Colonel Reed was one of those 3. A murmur moved through the terminal. Palmer glanced at Marcus. Marcus's face remained still. He never mentioned that, Palmer said. Marcus answered quietly. You never asked about Daniel. That shut Palmer down. Bennett continued. The Brooks family requested Colonel Reed personally for this escort. Patricia's face flashed through Marcus's memory. The kitchen table. The photograph. Every mile. Bennett looked toward Daniel's transfer case. This is not a favor Colonel Reed is doing for the Army. He paused. It is a promise he is keeping to a family. The terminal felt different after that. Not because Marcus had become more important, because Daniel had become more real. Susan Miller looked through the glass and pressed her lips together. Melissa wiped quickly beneath one eye. Palmer remained silent. But Bennett had not finished. There is something else. Marcus turned his head slightly. General, Bennett looked at him. Marcus knew that tone. Please don't. Bennett knew Marcus well enough to hear it. He also knew when humility was beginning to hide something the room needed to understand. Colonel, this isn't about praise. Marcus said nothing. It's about context. Bennett turned toward Susan and Palmer. Years ago, Colonel Reed submitted a series of after-action recommendations concerning battlefield evacuation. Marcus looked toward the floor for the first time. Rachel noticed. So did Thomas. Bennett continued. He identified weaknesses in how injured personnel were transferred from initial extraction points to follow-on care during rapidly changing operations. Palmer seemed confused. What does that have to do with today? Bennett's eyes hardened. It tells you something about the man you decided not to listen to. Palmer stopped speaking. Those recommendations were reviewed, expanded, and incorporated into evacuation procedures used by multiple Army units. Bennett glanced toward Marcus. Procedures that have since helped save dozens of adult service members. The terminal erupted in whispers. Marcus's jaw tightened. He hated this part. Not because it was false, because it was incomplete. Other people had refined the recommendations. Other officers had tested them. Medical teams had made them practical. Marcus had always believed credit belonged to systems when systems worked. He said quietly, General, a lot of people built that protocol. Bennett nodded. They did. Then he looked directly at him. And you were the one who refused to let the original problem be ignored. Marcus fell silent. Bennett faced Palmer. Do you see the pattern? Palmer's expression hardened defensively. I don't understand. Colonel Reed notices when a system fails someone. The general's voice was quiet, and instead of protecting his own comfort, he stays until someone fixes it. Marcus looked at Bennett. That sentence hit deeper than the praise had. Bennett continued. Today he could have called me within 5 minutes. Susan looked toward Marcus. Bennett nodded toward him. He didn't. Rebecca spoke. He specifically asked us not to intervene yet. Palmer stared at Marcus. Why? Marcus finally answered. Because I wanted to know whether you'd correct this before finding out who might answer my phone call. The words landed harder than anger ever could. Palmer's face changed. Marcus continued. If you treated me properly only because a general appeared, then you still hadn't learned anything. Nobody spoke. Outside, one of the helicopters altered position under ground control direction. Its rotor wash sent rainwater racing across a distant section of pavement. Bennett looked through the windows. The formation outside was already participating in a regional aviation movement. Susan nodded slowly, understanding. Bennett continued. When Movement Control saw that Staff Sergeant Brooks' escort had been disrupted, the issue came up the command chain. I redirected the formation as part of an alternate transport plan. He looked toward Daniel. We were not going to leave that soldier's final journey uncertain because one commercial station manager refused to document his reason for stopping the escort. Palmer's face drained. So the helicopters are not a punishment. Bennett's voice sharpened. They are transportation. Thomas almost smiled. Marcus did not. That distinction mattered. The Army had not sent 10 aircraft to humiliate Eric Palmer. It had moved resources to protect Daniel's dignity. That made the sight outside far more powerful. Susan stepped toward Bennett. General, the airline is prepared to cooperate fully. Bennett looked at her. Good. Then Susan looked toward Marcus. Colonel Reed, the hold has been removed. Marcus nodded. Thank you. We can still accommodate you on Flight 237 if... Rebecca interrupted gently. That commercial itinerary is no longer required. Susan stopped. The power had shifted completely. For most of the morning, Palmer had controlled whether Marcus could move. Now Palmer's decision no longer mattered at all. Marcus should have felt satisfaction. Instead, he felt tired. He looked at the passengers. 47 adults. Some had recorded. One had spoken first. Most had watched. Now they looked at Marcus differently. That was exactly what hurt. A contractor who had avoided his eyes earlier approached slowly. Colonel, I just want to say I'm sorry. Marcus looked at him. For what? The man hesitated. For standing there. Marcus held his gaze, then nodded. Remember that feeling next time. The contractor swallowed. I will. Marcus hoped so. Palmer stepped out from behind the counter. His confidence was gone. Colonel Reed. Marcus turned. Palmer's voice trembled slightly. I owe you an apology. Marcus looked at him. The terminal fell silent again. Palmer glanced toward General Bennett, toward Rebecca, toward the helicopters, toward Rachel's phone. Then he looked back at Marcus. I'm sorry, Colonel. Marcus's face did not change. Not yet. Because Palmer had just made one final mistake. He had apologized to the rank. Marcus glanced down at the scratched coin, then at the inexpensive man he had been hours earlier at Morning Star, carrying Helen's groceries and repairing Walter's walker, where nobody cared what was on his shoulders. When Marcus looked up again, his voice was calm. Don't apologize to my rank. Palmer stared at him, and the terminal grew so quiet that Marcus could hear the rain beginning to tap softly against the airport windows. Marcus let the silence remain. Eric Palmer stood several feet away, no longer protected by the counter, his station manager badge suddenly looking very small against his dark suit. Don't apologize to my rank, Marcus repeated. Palmer's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Marcus glanced toward the windows, where 10 military helicopters now sat or maneuvered under coordinated ground control beyond the rain-streaked glass. Their presence had changed everything in less than 20 minutes. That was exactly the problem. Marcus turned back. If I had walked in here this morning wearing the jacket I wore at Morning Star... Palmer frowned slightly. Marcus continued. No medals, no ribbons, no officer insignia, just Marcus Reed. He paused. Would you be apologizing? Palmer looked toward General Bennett. Marcus noticed. Don't look at him. Palmer slowly returned his eyes to Marcus. I'm asking you. Susan Miller shifted uneasily nearby. Rachel Kim's phone remained raised, but she had stopped moving. Even her breathing seemed quieter. Palmer swallowed. I made a mistake. Marcus's expression remained steady. That's not what I asked. Rain tracked down the windows behind him. Palmer looked toward Melissa, then Laura, then the 47 adults who had watched the confrontation grow from a ticketing dispute into something none of them would forget. He finally said, I don't know. Marcus nodded. It was not the answer he wanted, but it was honest That's what needs fixing. Palmer blinked. Marcus stepped closer to the counter and gathered his papers into a neat stack. My rank didn't make those documents valid. He placed his identification on top. The cameras didn't make them valid. The escort authorization followed. The helicopters didn't make them valid. Then Marcus placed the scratched brass coin on top of everything. And Daniel saving my life didn't make me more deserving of basic respect than the man standing behind me with a boarding pass. Thomas Walker's eyes lowered. Several passengers did the same. Marcus looked across the room. The problem isn't that you failed to recognize someone important. His voice carried without needing volume. The problem is that you decided a person had to be important before you treated him fairly. No one moved. Susan Miller looked as if she wanted to respond. Marcus turned toward her. Ms. Miller? Yes, Colonel. Marcus? She hesitated. Marcus, don't fire him because you're embarrassed. Palmer looked up sharply. Susan seemed equally surprised. Colonel, Marcus, given what happened, suspension at minimum is... I'm not asking you to protect him. Marcus's tone remained calm. I'm asking you not to turn one man into the whole problem and pretend the system is fixed. General Bennett watched without interrupting. A faint look of approval appeared in Rebecca Foster's eyes. Marcus continued. Preserve the reservation log. Susan nodded. The original one? Before anybody edits notes or adds explanations. Of course. Preserve the security call record. Laura lifted her notebook. Already requested. Marcus nodded to her. Thank you. He looked toward Rachel. And the witness recordings, if they're willing. Rachel answered immediately. You can have mine? Marcus looked at Thomas. So can you. Thomas gave one short nod. Susan took out her phone. I'll contact corporate compliance. Marcus shook his head. Independent review. Susan paused. Outside the station? Outside the reporting line that allowed a manual hold to happen without a reason code. Melissa looked at Marcus. He noticed. And previous holds. Susan's expression tightened. What about them? Review them. Palmer stared at him. Marcus continued. If this was the first time, the records will show it. And if it wasn't? Rachel asked quietly. Marcus looked at Palmer. Then this morning wasn't an isolated mistake. That sentence seemed to weigh more heavily on Palmer than anything Bennett had said. Susan nodded slowly. I'll request a full audit of discretionary station holds. Not just this airport. Her eyebrows lifted. Marcus gestured toward the reservation record. If one manager can stop a verified passenger, leave the reason blank, call it security, and force the passenger to prove the hold shouldn't exist, then the weakness isn't only Eric Palmer. Susan exhaled. System-wide. Yes, for the first time, Palmer understood that the consequences spreading outward were not coming from revenge. Marcus was not trying to destroy him. He was doing what Bennett had said he always did, finding the point where a system failed someone and refusing to walk away until it was examined. Palmer's shoulders dropped. What happens to me? Marcus looked at him. That's not my decision. Palmer seemed confused. You could ask them to fire me. I could. After what I did, you probably should. Marcus studied him. I asked for justice. He picked up the brass coin. Not the privilege of becoming you. Palmer flinched. Marcus did not mean it cruelly. That almost made it worse. Susan spoke quietly. Eric, effective immediately. You're relieved of station duties pending investigation. Palmer closed his eyes. The announcement did not produce applause. Marcus was grateful for that. This wasn't a victory scene. A man had made a serious decision and would now face consequences through a process that examined what he had done. That was enough. Melissa stepped away from the computer. Ms. Miller? Susan looked at her. I need to say something. Melissa's hands were clasped tightly in front of her. I saw his reservation was confirmed. Marcus turned toward her. Melissa's eyes filled. Not at first. I saw it. But when Eric said there was a concern, I thought maybe he knew something I didn't. She swallowed. Then I realized there wasn't anything there. No one interrupted. And I still didn't say anything. Her voice cracked. I kept waiting for somebody else to do it. Marcus glanced toward the crowd. So did Melissa. I was afraid I'd lose my job. Marcus nodded slowly. I understand fear. Melissa looked surprised. That doesn't mean what I did was right. No. He said it gently. Her eyes lowered. But you told the truth when it mattered. Late. Late matters more than never. Melissa wiped beneath one eye. Susan spoke. You'll be interviewed as part of the review. Melissa nodded. I'll cooperate. Thomas Walker took a slow breath. Then he faced the crowd. She's not the only one. Several people looked at him. Thomas placed his cap back on his head. I stood there a while too. Rachel lowered her phone. So did I. A woman with the paper coffee cup whispered, Me too. Then another voice. And another. Nobody offered excuses. Marcus looked at them and felt something inside him loosen. Not forgiveness exactly. Recognition. Silence could fail people, but people could also decide not to repeat it. General Bennett checked his watch. We need to move, Daniel. The name changed the atmosphere instantly. Marcus turned toward the windows. Of course, Daniel. For nearly an hour, everyone had been talking about Marcus Reed, Eric Palmer, airline policy, cameras, helicopters, rank, accountability. Daniel had never asked to become part of any of it. Marcus slid his documents into the escort folder. Ready. Rebecca stepped closer. Ground movement is prepared. We'll transfer from here to the military transport plan. Marcus nodded. Susan approached him one last time. We'll release a public statement. Marcus stopped. Use Daniel's name carefully. She waited. This story isn't a marketing opportunity. No. And don't call me a hero. Susan looked almost embarrassed. What should we say? Marcus looked through the glass. Say you stopped an authorized passenger without a valid reason. Susan nodded. Say your employee created the hold. Another nod. Say people had to challenge it before you corrected it. Susan's expression tightened, but she nodded again. And say you're investigating whether it happened before. Anything else? Marcus's hand closed around the coin. Say Staff Sergeant Daniel Brooks deserved better than spending his final journey waiting, while adults argued over whether the man assigned to stay with him looked trustworthy enough. Susan lowered her eyes. I will. Marcus turned away. As he passed Thomas, the retired Marine held out his hand. Marcus took it. Brother, Thomas said. Brother. Thomas's grip tightened. You kept your cool better than I would have. Marcus gave the faintest smile. That's why they made me Army. Thomas stared at him for half a second, then laughed. The sound was quiet but needed. Marcus turned toward Rachel. Thank you. She shook her head. I waited too long. Marcus looked at her phone. What you do next matters more. Rachel nodded. Then she did something Marcus did not expect. She stopped the live stream. Not because the story had become less important, because the next part did not belong to the internet. Marcus looked at her gratefully. Major Foster opened the secure corridor door. Beyond it, military personnel waited. Marcus took one last look at the terminal. Palmer stood beside Susan without his station manager badge now. Melissa remained near the computer. Laura was speaking quietly into her radio, preserving records. Passengers who had once looked away were now meeting Marcus's eyes. He did not feel taller. He did not feel more powerful. He felt tired and ready to finish the only mission that had mattered from the beginning. Marcus stepped through the secure door. The heavy door closed softly behind him. Hours later, while Daniel's journey continued, corporate investigators would discover that Eric Palmer's manual hold had not been the only questionable discretionary hold in the station's records. Several previous passengers had complained. Their complaints had been categorized separately, lost in different files, explained away one at a time. Now they would be examined together. Palmer's removal would become only the beginning. New review procedures would follow. Manual station holds would require documented reasons and secondary approval in sensitive cases. Military casualty transfer interruptions would trigger immediate escalation rather than leaving escorts trapped at a counter. Previous decisions would be audited. The consequences would move through offices Marcus would never visit, but he would refuse every interview asking him to celebrate. When one reporter later requested a statement, Marcus sent only 3 sentences. "This should not become a story about me. Staff Sergeant Daniel Brooks served his country and deserved dignity on his final journey. His family deserved to know he would not come home alone." By sunset, those words had traveled farther than Rachel's original video. Marcus never saw most of the responses. He was somewhere quieter by then, somewhere without cameras, walking beside Daniel again. And waiting at the end of that final road was Patricia Brooks, still holding Marcus to 4 words that mattered more than every headline in the country. Stay with him. Every mile. By the time the procession reached Patricia Brooks' neighborhood, the rain had stopped. The clouds over Columbus had opened just enough for the last light of evening to spill across the wet streets in long amber streaks. Porch lamps glowed one by one beneath small awnings. Water still clung to power lines. Tires whispered over damp pavement. There were no television trucks, no airline executives, no live streams. Only neighbors, veterans, service members, and working people standing quietly along the curb. Marcus preferred it that way. The military procession moved slowly through the neighborhood where Daniel had grown into the man Marcus had known. Adults stood with hands over their hearts. Some held small American flags. Others simply removed their caps and bowed their heads as the vehicles passed. Marcus sat close to Daniel throughout the final movement. His dress uniform was still immaculate, but the day had left something behind in his face. Exhaustion, grief, and the strange emptiness that comes when a person spends hours fighting for a promise and finally reaches the moment when there is nothing left to fight, only to keep it. The scratched brass coin rested in his closed hand. DB to MR. No one comes home alone. Marcus had carried it through the terminal, through the confrontation, past Eric Palmer, past 47 silent witnesses, past 10 helicopters darkening the runway. But the coin had never belonged to any of those moments. It belonged here. The procession turned onto Patricia's street. Marcus saw the brick duplex before the vehicle stopped. The same porch light was on. The same pecan tree leaned over the sidewalk. The same curtains hung behind the front window. But nothing looked the same anymore. Patricia Brooks stood at the edge of her yard. She wore the same dark coat Marcus remembered from the night before. Denise Walker stood several steps behind her, having closed Morning Star early enough to come. Helen Carter, 68, was beside Walter Price, 71, who leaned carefully against the walker Marcus had repaired that morning. Walter had polished his veteran's cap. Helen held his arm. Nobody spoke. Marcus stepped down. For a moment he stayed beside the vehicle. He had imagined this moment several times during the day, at the counter, while Palmer talked about policy, while Susan offered first class, while General Bennett explained the helicopters. In every imagined version, Marcus thought he would know what to say. Now Patricia was standing 20 feet away, and language failed him. He walked toward her. One step, then another. The sound of his polished shoes against damp pavement seemed impossibly loud. Patricia looked first at Marcus, then beyond him. Her face changed. Not dramatically. The grief had already been living inside her too long for surprise. Instead, her shoulders slowly lowered, as though some part of her had been holding itself rigid since the notification came, and finally understood that it no longer had to. Marcus stopped in front of her. Patricia. She looked at his uniform, at the ribbons, at the exhaustion in his eyes. Then at his hand. Marcus opened it. The brass coin lay in his palm. Patricia stared at Daniel's initials. Her breath caught. Marcus held the coin out. She did not take it immediately. You kept it? Yes, ma'am. Her eyes lifted to his. You stayed with him? That was all. Not did the airline apologize. Not were the helicopters really there. Not how many people were watching. Just the question that had mattered from the beginning. Marcus had held himself together through the entire day, through Palmer's insinuations, through the police call, through the manual hold, through Daniel's story being told in front of strangers, through the arrival of senior command, through the moment 10 helicopters turned a quiet injustice into something the country could not ignore. But Patricia's question found the one place all that discipline could not protect. Marcus's voice broke. Every mile, ma'am. Patricia closed her eyes. For several seconds, she simply stood there. Then she reached for the coin. Marcus placed it carefully into her palm. Her fingers closed around it, the same way his had all morning. She pressed the coin against her chest. Thank you. Marcus shook his head. No thanks needed. Patricia opened her eyes. Yes. Marcus said nothing. You brought him home. The words nearly undid him. He looked away toward the procession. Thomas Walker had arrived quietly in another vehicle and stood near the curb, his marine cap held over his heart. Rachel Kim was not there. Marcus was grateful for that too. Rachel had understood that some moments were not improved by being recorded. The final transfer proceeded with measured military precision. There were no dramatic speeches, no applause, only footsteps, commands spoken softly, the movement of a flag in the evening breeze. Marcus stayed where Patricia could see him. Every mile. He had meant it literally. By the time darkness settled fully over Columbus, Daniel Brooks was home. The rest of the country was only beginning to understand what had happened at the airport. The airline released its statement the following morning. Unlike the first draft prepared by its public relations department, the final version did not describe the confrontation as a misunderstanding. Marcus had insisted on that. The company acknowledged that an authorized passenger had been subjected to a manual discretionary hold without a documented reason. It confirmed that station manager Eric Palmer had been removed from duty pending formal investigation. The statement also announced an independent review of previous discretionary holds. That review uncovered several earlier complaints, different passengers, different days, similar patterns. No single case had attracted enough attention by itself. Together, they told a different story. Within weeks, the airline changed its procedures. Manual station holds required a documented reason and secondary review in designated sensitive cases. Interruptions involving military casualty transport triggered immediate escalation to senior operations staff. Complaint records could no longer be separated so easily across unrelated categories when they concerned the same manager or decision pattern. Eric Palmer faced formal disciplinary consequences after the investigation concluded. Melissa Grant remained employed, but only after cooperating fully and completing additional training. She later volunteered to participate in internal sessions about how fear and hierarchy could turn silence into complicity. Susan Miller oversaw part of the reform process. Marcus accepted none of the company's offers for complimentary travel. He declined interviews from national networks. He refused an invitation to appear on a morning show. When reporters asked about the 10 helicopters, Marcus gave the same answer every time. They were there for Staff Sergeant Brooks. When people tried to call Marcus a hero, he redirected them. Daniel saved 3 men. When someone praised Marcus for staying calm, he said only, "Being calm shouldn't be the price of being treated fairly." The country talked for days, then weeks. Eventually, as countries do, it moved toward the next story. Marcus returned to Morning Star. The first morning back, Victory Drive was still dark when he unlocked the kitchen door. Warm yellow light spread across the old tile floor. The coffee urn rattled. A bus sighed at the corner. Marcus tied the faded brown apron around his waist. No medals. No ribbons. No cameras. Helen Carter arrived first. She carried no groceries this time. Just 2 paper cups of coffee. She set one beside Marcus. "Heard you're famous," Marcus groaned. Helen smiled. "Don't worry. It won't improve your cooking." Walter Price came through the door next, pushing his walker smoothly. "Wheel still works. That's the best news I've had all week." Walter looked at Marcus for a moment, then quietly removed his veteran's cap. He did not salute. Marcus was glad. Walter simply said, "You did right." Marcus looked down at the counter. "I kept a promise." That's usually what doing right looks like. Denise Walker appeared from the pantry carrying bread trays. "Are we opening a philosophy club or serving breakfast?" Walter pointed toward Marcus. He started it. Marcus laughed. It was the first easy laugh he had felt in days. Soon the kitchen filled with the sounds it always had. Coffee pouring, chairs scraping, plates clinking, adults greeting one another by name. Marcus washed dishes beneath warm yellow light while rainwater from the previous night still glittered outside the windows. Nobody treated him differently. That mattered more than he expected. Across town, Patricia sat alone for a while in Daniel's living room. The folded American flag rested carefully on the table. Beside it lay the photograph from last Christmas, and beside that lay the scratched brass challenge coin. She ran one finger over the engraving. "No one comes home alone." Then she smiled through tears. At the airport, Eric Palmer had thought power belonged to the man who could decide whether someone moved forward or stepped aside. The passengers had thought power belonged to the person brave enough to raise a phone. The airline had thought power arrived with executives. And when 10 helicopters crossed the gray Georgia sky, everyone had seen a kind of power too large to ignore. But none of those things had been the real power in the story. The real power had been quieter. It was Marcus carrying Helen's groceries before sunrise, fixing Walter's walker and refusing payment, standing beneath fluorescent lights while a stranger tried to make him feel smaller than he was, giving the airline one last chance to do right before revealing who would answer his call, choosing reform over revenge, and staying beside Daniel when there was nothing Marcus could gain from doing so. Marcus Reed's dignity had not appeared when General Bennett entered the terminal. It had not begun when the helicopters arrived. It had been there when nobody recognized him. That evening, Patricia switched off the living room lamp. The folded flag disappeared into shadow, but the brass coin caught one last thread of streetlight from the window. A small, scratched thing, easy to overlook, impossible to understand until someone knew what it carried. A promise, a debt, a life remembered, and 4 words Marcus Reed had kept all the way home. "Every mile, ma'am." When 47 people stayed silent, would you have been the first to speak? Marcus Reed kept his promise to Daniel Brooks all the way home, even after the airport gave him every reason to make the fight about himself. This story reminds us that silence is also a choice when we can clearly see someone being treated unfairly. You don't need rank, influence, or perfect words to interrupt an injustice. You only need to decide that looking away is no longer acceptable. So the next time you see someone being singled out while everyone else stays quiet, ask one simple question. Is everything okay here? Marcus didn't need 47 people to become heroes that morning. He needed one person willing to break the silence. If you had been standing in that terminal, would you have spoken before Thomas Walker did? Tell me below what you think you would have done. And stay with me because the next story begins with another ordinary moment when almost everyone chooses to look away.